A bounty boss has finally done it. Scorpius has clinched his place into the Golden Bolt bracket, and it was quite a fascinating tournament to get there. We had upsets, we had split decisions, we had fantastic matches and anticlimactic matches, multiple countries represented, and a lot of different weapon types in this episode of Battlebots Champions, which we break down blow for blow here next at the Combot Collective.
Oh my God! Wow! This is the biggest flame we've ever seen.
Has preserved enough energy to get in the flip on Carbine. We're going to go all the way.
Oh my God! That's going to hurt.
Grab the milk, Jenny.
Welcome to the Combot Collective.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Battlebots breakdown episode here at the Combot Collective, breaking down the fourth episode of Battlebots Champions and our fourth bounty bracket / Golden Bolt qualifier bracket here. It was a bracket, of course, headed by our bounty boss Scorpius, but a bracket which featured plenty of weapon variety. Of course, we had horizontal spinners like the big-time South Korean spinner ORBY Blade, former number 2 seed Bloodsport, some very unique overhead weapons like Texas's SwitchBack, the veteran Alkindle with his robot Blacksmith, and also some flippers. We had Lucky competing in this event. We had some lifters in deadlift, and of course Big Dill, the robot which won 2021's Robot Ruckus event, something we'll be talking about here in just a second. As we won't waste too much time, we have 9 exciting robots to break down here and 8 thrilling fights in all sorts of different categories. Like I said in our little intro bit, like I said to start, we have matches that went all the way to the distance, split decisions. We also have matches that died and pretty much were decided in opening 30 seconds here. Matches all around, and like I said, some big upsets, some predictable results. But let's not waste too much time. Let's find out which of these robots will end up be joining the likes of Tombstone, Tantrum, Hypershock, and Glitch in this Champions Golden Bolt bracket. With our very first fight here, horizontal spinner versus lifter, Bloodsport versus Big Dill. But now let's jump right into the fights here as we talk about the first match's pre-fights here with Big Dill versus Bloodsport. It is worth noting that the Big Dill / Banana Brunt that won Robot Ruckus 2021 had a brand new weapon gearbox for that event, something that ended up playing a big factor during their win there that was not present during this tournament. What was present though would be their signature 20-inch long lifting fork, the 4-wheel drive wedge minibot Spicy Meatball, and 2 hunks of metal which were welded to the front of Big Dill's wedge. These hunks of metal will be chunks of free shipping given to them by Gary Jin in an attempt to absorb some of those horizontal spinner impacts coming from Bloodsport. Bloodsport meanwhile had much less thought put into their setup, armed with only 2 wedgets and their signature 48-inch long bar, a weapon that we've seen them use plenty of times in the past. In terms of their strategy for Justin Marple here though, there isn't much with the robot like Bloodsport, as just like Ice Wave strategies during episode 3 versus free shipping, the plan was to focus on the edges of Big Dill's wedge and the sides also, with the wheels being of course the biggest target here for Bloodsport. Emmanuel Carrillo with Big Dill's strategy was also fairly straightforward. Go in with Spicy Meatball and high center them before going in to make the lift. Emmanuel would say he has plenty of history versus other horizontal spinner armed robots and believed they had their beater bricks and wedges in the perfect position to counter Bloodsport's offense. Emmanuel Carrillo seemed very confident in this match, but things would turn fairly quickly once the fight actually began. Bloodsport would avoid the minibot's charge in the opening seconds and then managed to land its first significant strike of the tournament to Big Dill right then and there, but the robot from Washington would bounce back quickly with a lift and a solid charge of their own, slamming Bloodsport into the red square screws. But unfortunately for Big Dill, that's about the only highlight it would manage in this fight, as from that ram, the weapon chain on Big Dill would snap, a likely reason for the changes made before Robot Ruckus 2021, as Big Dill would be left completely stunned and stranded, beginning to show some serious drive issues while Bloodsport would get away, spinning itself back up to full speed. Of course, from this point, it was all downhill as Big Dill would get wedged into the screws and Bloodsport would lay in 2 more significant strikes, the latter of these 2 hits completely tearing off the HDPE rear panel of Big Dill, exposing everything inside and leaving the lifter from Washington in quite a pickle, while Bloodsport and Justin Marple would turn their attention to the minibot Spicy Meatball. Spicy Meatball would try fighting back, wedging under Bloodsport a couple of times before the horizontal spinner would land its 4th and final significant strike of the fight to that minibot, obliterating Spicy Meatball and shooting it like a puck directly into the upper deck spike strips as lipo smoke would begin billowing out of the meatball shortly after the impact. Bloodsport though takes the fight with ease, knocking both Big Dill and Spicy Meatball out in less than a minute. But, you know, it's always disappointing to see a belt or chain break on a robot during this opening move, and that is exactly what would happen here to Big Dill and Emmanuel Carrillo. And this is probably something that could have been fixed if Big Dill had those extra fights during the regular season, like I mentioned in our last video. You know, Big Dill was a fresh bot here and an untested robot, while Bloodsport and BNS Robotics knew exactly what kind of robot they were handling after 4 fights in its year at that point so far, given the regular season and the playoffs. The team chose Reach though with the long 48-inch bar and paid out big time, keeping itself at bay from Big Dill for the most part while landing some serious impacts, especially those last two while Big Dill was pinned to the spike strips and screws. For Big Dill though, we do know that this is not the end of this robot in the battle box this year. Big Dill will be competing at least one more time in one of the 10 exhibition fights Battlebots is hosting this year. A fight where Big Dill will have a chairs match versus Overhaul. No, I'm not joking, and hopefully we will see that matchup soon enough. I have to imagine Big Dill will have more of a chance to shine in that fight, and overall will hopefully get a more full-time chance and a shake at the 2022-2023 Battlebots Championship after their success at Robot Ruckus 2021, going 5-0. The team certainly deserves it, and Western Allied Robotics, given how big they are and how much impact they have on the robot combat scene, they deserve a second representative in the World Championship along Claw Viper, in my opinion. But now let's jump into the other half of the bracket here and our second match of the episode. It's our aforementioned battle of the Northeastern Robot Combat eras as one of the true OGs of the sport, Al Kindle with Blacksmith, takes on one of the new hot teams in the Midwest and Northeast live scenes, Team RoboGym with their new lifter Deadlift. Two robots which could really use a good run in this tournament to redeem their annual reputations after 2 rough appearances at the 2021 regular season. This will be the first of many pre-fight intros they'd skip in this episode, so it's kind of hard to get much in terms of the details on what these robots are bringing here to these fights. But Blacksmith is in its classic setup with the power hammer and their 2 main green forks, while Deadlift would do similar. No wedgelets up front and the muscle clamper attached, and what looked to be a pair of HDPE plastic shields covering the front of Deadlift. Not a bad idea. But within the opening 3 seconds, Blacksmith would pretty much lock itself the match W with its opening significant strike to the right side of Deadlift, killing part of the control bot's right side drive and leaving it squirming for essentially the rest of the match, as it was pretty much all Blacksmith from that point on forward. Al Kindle would drive Deadlift all over the arena with multiple slams to the spike strips and 11 more powerful significant strikes from the signature power hammer, while Deadlift could barely even get its flamethrower working for more than 5 seconds this match. Perhaps, though, the most impactful of these 11 strikes would be the very final one, a buzzer beater where Blacksmith would cause visible damage to itself, busting its weapon belt right as time expired, but ultimately would be fine and the judges wouldn't really count it against it. Though that is the big take here for Deadlift, as despite being pretty much a live toy for Blacksmith during a majority of this fight, the Indiana robot did take a licking but kept on kicking without any major malfunctions outside of losing right side drive during that opening hit. Blacksmith meanwhile pushed on and landed some very solid offense without suffering any damage at all to the robot functionally for the whole fight, with its only moment of panic really coming near the final moment when it momentarily had a fork caught in one of the kill saw slots. But Blacksmith will be fine, even despite the kill saw slots and losing its weapon chain. It would go on to dominate with a unanimous judges decision and 12 significant strikes total, 11 coming from the power hammer and 1 coming from that midway match slam which almost flipped Deadlift over. And speaking of Deadlift, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the lifter come the 2022-2023 Robot Combat season. After 2 rough seasons, I do genuinely wonder if Battlebots will be willing to give a robot, which was originally a last moment COVID selection, another opportunity here for a 3rd season. Deadlift certainly looked the part this season with both the robot and the team rocking that gym head theme. Plus, recent results at events like Motorama 2022 seem to give RoboGym a chance to be seen yet again in the battle box, but as we always say here at the Combot Collective, only time will tell as we move on to our 3rd round 1 match, maybe the biggest upset of the episode. And talking about that matchup, once again, just like our prior fight, we go straight to the battle box with this one. But we do get a chance to look at the robots some, as we do see SwitchBack armed with one of their lightest weapon setups, only 3 pairs of teeth and 60 pounds total on the spinning drum of SwitchBack. While on Lucky's end, the wheel guards would be on like we expected, big front wedges as well, plus the addition of those cat ears extensions on the top of the wedge to keep Lucky safe from any up-high strikes coming from SwitchBack's drum. The most fascinating move here though from CM Robotics is the removal of the main front of the launching arm, going for more of a punching arm style like we saw versus ORBY Blade in round 2. Likely due to weight concerns, though this might end up biting them in the ass. We'll talk about that in a moment. As this match was an odd one, a fascinating one, a short one, and like I said at the start, certainly the biggest upset of the episode by far. Both the Canadian and Texan robots jockey for position, and much to my surprise, a near perfect thus far Matt Olson, driver for Lucky, made a bad turn, leaving Lucky's left side open, and SwitchBack would capitalize, delivering a vicious strike directly to Lucky's left wheel guard. This significant strike, just like Blacksmith opening impact to deadlift, would decimate one side of Lucky's drive with just seconds into the fight, with things only going more like the Luckies of seasons past by the second here in this match, when Lucky's flipper would proceed to lock in an upright position just moments later, and then be followed after that with smoke coming out of Lucky, some serious smoke there. But SwitchBack meanwhile was far from perfect after the initial strike, also looking to be dealing with some serious drive issues of its own after the strike to Lucky. But similar to Uppercut versus Dragon Slayer during last week, the officials put much of their focus on the more visibly distressed Lucky, though the ref duo may have known something I didn't, and SwitchBack could have been just waiting for movement from Lucky. This may not be as big of a scene as I'm thinking it may be here. So Lucky is out. Huge shocker here, but despite all of that, the real story here for me is the shocking rare ear here from Matt Olson, who has been near perfect all season, even in his first fight against the eventual Battlebots Tantrum champion. He has looked near perfect with his decision making and moves here, but this is nothing to smite the team or driver down upon for, as in the end of the day, Matt Olson is still a rookie driver and will still ultimately be looked at as one of the rookie of the year contenders when things are all said and done entering the 2022 season. As for the robot itself though, this was Lucky's first real serious step towards being a world championship contender, and after so many tough years, 2016, 2018, 2019, these kinds of losses are bound to still happen from time to time, and the only way for Lucky to go, in my opinion, is still upwards. I would expect a lot from Lucky entering the 2022 World Championship. Watch out for Matt Olson and Mark Demers and the rest of this crew here at CM Robotics. But now on to our final round 1 match of the episode, coming near the halfway mark, as this is really going to be a moment that stands out. I mean, we have it on the thumbnail for a reason. This was just emotional, as in what may have been one of the sadder moments we have seen in Battlebots for quite some time. We have the exciting fight of South Korea's ORBY Blade and our last crusher standing in Battlebots, unless we get a Petunia or a Quantum back, of course. Maybe a new robot, but I digress. We're of course talking about Kraken. Now, there's not much to be changed on a robot like ORBY Blade. The modularity in a robot, like many other weapon-based competitors, is all in that weapon itself. Team Orbee would put on their Hardox Lumbar for this fight, their last Hardox Blade remaining, with the other one getting shattered in the fight versus Lucky earlier on this year. ORBY Blade would also be flanked by a 1-pound mini-bot built like the Comedy Central era legend Overkill with the twacking overhead hammer. Meanwhile, CE Robotics and Kraken entered the arena, warming all of our hearts with the team hugging the robot on its final trip to sea. Kraken, of course, like we mentioned in the past, stuck running the Kraken chassis, not designed for horizontal spinner action, but ultimately the robot still looked solid in this fight, despite missing a couple teeth entering the box. Now, Team Orbee gave the usual spinner versus control bot strategy we have seen quite a bit lately, which is keep away from the wedge on Kraken and keep that ORBY Blade up to Orbee speed. Meanwhile, Matt Burke reasonably was incredibly nervous about this fight, given the chassis the team had to use, but the team did state though they literally wanted to fight fire with fire, even if it meant doing their own tornado move in this tournament, giving everything they can to shut ORBY Blade down during this fight. But this would be an exciting fight, one of the best of this entire episode, but definitely a bittersweet one for our team from Florida here. Kraken tried to square up with Orbee's Blade, but a quick spin up time and solid driving led Orbee to get the better of these first 2 quick exchanges, managing a pair of vicious strikes which had already left a gash in the tongue wedge of Kraken. And immediately after this, we'd see what would be Orbee's scariest moment of the fight, teasing what looked to be a mobility by the kill saw slots, but horizontal spinner would eventually break before obliterating Wally the Narwhal, Kraken's mini-bot seconds later, while the main bot attempted to reset despite what looked to be some visible drive issues for CE Robotics and Kraken here. ORBY Blade though would eventually get back in on the offense during the second minute of the fight, rocking Kraken with 2 more significant strikes before Kraken would have some time of its own to shine here, getting a solid hold of Orbee by that rear wedge and driving it around the arena, but not able to get any actual crushing purchase even with that 100,000 PSI bite, which was supposed to be one of the strongest crushers, even the strongest crusher we have ever seen in robot combat. Up to this point, wasn't really doing its job here though. As instead, unfortunately, this bite would end up only helping ORBY Blade, as during a slam to the upper deck screws, we would see Orbee begin to rip away at Kraken's left wheel big time while Kraken was still holding the South Korean, doing some serious damage and forcing Kraken to release its bite, as 2 more significant strikes post-release from ORBY Blade would kill Kraken's right side drive, which left the Sea Beast flopping like a fish to this point, as ORBY Blade would offer 7 more significant strikes in that final 60 seconds, completely caving away the front of Kraken while the fight closed out. I mean, there was just nothing left of the front of this bot besides those 2 side wedge panels holding the whole robot together. It was beautiful. But obviously, ORBY Blade would win this matchup via unanimous judges' decision. It was one of the robot's best career fights in either Battlebots, King of Bots, or This Is Fighting Robots. The robot looked great here. The team looked great here. Ching Wang-un drove the robot fantastically. But like I said when we started talking about this fight, the big story for me here is that Matt Spurk would announce right then and there something we've discussed at TCC in the past, but here it is officially, that this was Kraken's final fight in the battle box during those post-fight interviews. Matt Spurk, of course, a longtime Roboteer and CE Robotics captain, would have a bit of trouble breaking out the big news along with the rest of his family there. An absolutely emotional moment, and you know, it's really a damn shame that the team had to do this with how Battlebots is moving in the future. Just another point to the fact that we need more openings for control bots to be able to win these fights. Kraken has been dealt quite a shitty hand with this season, and while I'm glad we got to see it really shine during South Florida Fair in January, especially with that beautiful extinguisher fight, I mean, this was just heartbreaking to watch, and I really hope we still get to see Kraken compete in future live events, and I seriously look forward to what's next for CE Robotics in terms of Battlebots. Maybe we'll get that big time spinner Kraken was wanting to do originally? We'll just have to see. As now, let's move swiftly on to the second round, the semifinals of this Scorpius bracket. Much variety in the weapon classes here, as we have overhead weapon versus overhead weapon, horizontal spinner versus horizontal spinner here. And we keep the Orbee train going, that train coming straight out of South Korea, as we talk about Orbee versus Bloodsport, the next fight on the episode here. And like I said, destructive horizontal spinner versus destructive horizontal spinner. South Korea versus USA. 2 beautiful robots with a lot of handcrafted, custom-made parts in this matchup. And Bloodsport would come into this fight reportedly damage-free from the Big Dill fight. Fairly unsurprising though, as Orbee, much like Blacksmith, apparently broke their weapon during the final strike of the matchup. Something we didn't know originally, but the team did get replaced, and ORBY Blade will be ready to go for the round 2 matchup, armed with the same Hardox long bar we just saw in that Kraken fight. Bloodsport, meanwhile, would run even less wedgelets for this fight, none at all, going for the anti-horizontal spinner plow instead, armed on Bloodsport's front, and along with their Holy Cross-esque thick par, armed with the 2 long teeth and the 2 short teeth. All this a very thick weapon, very wide, very powerful. But you know how it goes with these horizontal spinners. Not much strategy for 2 deadly robots like this. Team Orbee would state they had no strategy, just wanting to go weapon to weapon, while BNS Robotics would keep it similar, as the plan by Justin Marple's words were to simply last longer. But now let's talk about the fight, as there's not much to talk about on this one, with this frankly being the most anticlimactic fight of the evening. Hard to top given we just saw Lucky versus Switchback, but as Orbee was leaving its anti-horizontal spinner wedge out to open, Bloodsport would strike it to kick off the fight, and this would not work out well at all for Orbee, as the robot immediately looked stunned, and without its left side drive after the initial impact, Bloodsport would quickly follow up with a second and final significant strike of the fight. Like I said, this was a quick one, coming right to Orbee's side, which as we said in our last episode, the preview episode for episode 4 here, the true weak point on this robot. This strike would absolutely rock the anti-HS wedge on Orby Blade, leaving the robot at a weird angle which completely high-centered it. Less than 30 seconds into the fight, I mean, the weapon was moving, the wheels were moving, the Shreemec was moving, but the robot simply just wasn't. Understandably, Bloodsport was not going to keep this fight going, given it potentially had 2 more fights to go that day after this one, as Team Orbee just simply had to leave frustrated, as Bloodsport would go on to the finals with the greatest of ease. But, you know, it's always frustrating to lose on some sort of technicality, whether it be a kill saw slot KO like we saw versus Veep 6, or being high-centered on your own part like we saw here. But we all knew that was going to be an issue despite being an icon of the Asian scene. Orby Blade is still a serious glass cannon, and we're going to need to see a lot of changes to the beautiful Korean horizontal spinner before the next season. But I do personally think that we're going to be seeing Orby Blade become a Battlebot staple from this point on, given how just lovely the team are, what unique stuff they bring to the table, and an international representation. Hopefully next season we will see more Korean and Chinese teams get on the action as well. Maybe Orby Blade can open the floodgate and make this a regular occurrence. So that was a shockingly quick match, maybe one of the quickest match we've seen at Battlebots Champions all year, as we now know what big time horizontal spinner will go through, a robot I predicted to make it this far, Bloodsport, and now we see who it's going to be taking on. Like I said, a battle of overhead weapons. One robot I predicted to be here in Blacksmith, and one robot I very much did not predict to be here in SwitchBack. SwitchBack, of course, knocked out my prediction to win this entire little bracket, lucky. And if the greatest of ease, of course, those things do happen in robot combat. You never know who's really going to win a matchup, even though you might feel confident. We would see SwitchBack pull off the upset there, and now they're on to take on a very similar robot in Blacksmith. Overhead weapon versus overhead weapon, like I've been saying. And Blacksmith, like Bloodsport, would also enter its match damage free. Despite what little we did see on TV, it seems like it was smooth sailing for half-ass astronaut here. But the team did build a new front end out of spare parts for this upcoming match, which will be very fascinating to see here. Though its opponent SwitchBack wasn't so lucky against, well, lucky, and had some serious drive damage taken from its round 2 fight, but Greg Needell would state that after the match, that SwitchBack is built to be serviceable, so the team seemed confident to be back in a competitive state for this Blacksmith fight. Once again, talking about fight setups, seems to look to be the same from round 1 for both these overhead robots. We would see the same 60-pound 3-pair setup on SwitchBack with a pair of wedges on the front, while on Blacksmith we got to see that spare parts made version we were hearing about, with a new top panel made of a darker metal and what looked to be a pair of cat ear-like attachments similar to what we saw in Lucky, here for Blacksmith against SwitchBack also. In the pre-fight interviews, Greg Needell entered this fight thinking he had an even shot with this matchup, discussing the strategy being to focus on the flattened sides of Blacksmith to land strikes similar to what they delivered versus Lucky, while Al Kindle on the other hand was wary of SwitchBack's overhead weapon and knew to be careful about it, but also wanted to focus the power hammer right on the arm of the overhead drum on SwitchBack. SwitchBack once again surprised all of us by kicking the fight off with offense on their end, landing a trio of strikes, but Blacksmith would mostly ignore these impacts and start the fight on its own by driving SwitchBack right under the outer corner pulverizer and proceeding with a pair of significant strikes, one being a power hammer impact and the other being a hard slam which would flip the Texan robot over. SwitchBack would self-right from its exchange, something it failed to do during its debut, but this collision to open the fight would pretty much set the pace for this match, as Blacksmith followed with another significant strike which broke one of SwitchBack's lifter chains, and then continued with 3 more major strikes, leaving a gash in SwitchBack's top near the halfway point of the fight. Passing that 130 mark, Blacksmith would have its most alarming moment during the match, running into SwitchBack's powerful drum on accident and momentarily emitting smoke, but this would not kill Blacksmith momentum at all, as 2 more significant strikes would eventually knock SwitchBack out just 30 seconds later, I would say, entering that final minute of the match. So this means Blacksmith is not only advancing to the bracket final, but it's also doing what we all expected to do during the start of the 2021 season, score some knockouts. It dominated all 3 of the categories with ease and did some massive damage in this matchup. Kenny Florian would put it best by calling it a death of 1,000 cuts from what we saw it do to the armor and the weapon chain on Blacksmith. Meanwhile, on SwitchBack and Team Midnight Inventions End, they finished their year at 2-3. While not a good record, still a respectable year for a rookie and a very experimental robot like SwitchBack. And you know, if Sub-Zero does fail to win the bounty bracket next week, it will be the best performing Battlebot to come from Texas this year, and is most certainly in a great position to be returning for the 2022-2023 regular season. So now we have it, our bracket final, Bloodsport versus Blacksmith, a couple of killer bees who are two robots which were fresh coming into the 2021 season, having their best season yet. Of course, Bloodsport 2020 second seed, made it to the top 16. Blacksmith, its only top 16 appearance in their last season, 2019. Both kind of underwhelmed this year, trying to settle it, make it a better year for themselves with this matchup. And Bloodsport, much thanks to good fortune and a flawless win versus ORBY Blade, had zero damage whatsoever to their robot entering this bracket finale fight versus Blacksmith, only needing to switch over to their new weapon, the Ferris Wheel, named after ferrous metals, a weapon designed specifically to fight hammers and hammer saws, plus adding back those two wedgelets what we saw during the Big Deal fight. Blacksmith, meanwhile, would make another big-time body change for this matchup, bringing out the anti-HS plow setup similar to what we saw during the Malice fight, though looks like a bit different, maybe with a bit more of a lip seemingly near the bottom. I'm not too sure, as not much info is known about this attachment, as fight intros were once again skipped along with the team strategies. But what we do know here is that Blacksmith entered this fight with 20 significant strikes to Bloodsport's 6 from the prior two fights. But Bloodsport most certainly packed a bigger punch, as the pre-fight tail of the tape would suggest. And I mean, the evidence, the footage suggests it too. We've seen what that spinner can do. Let's talk about this finals fight though. It was an absolute back and forth classic, and one of the best fights we've seen in the episode, maybe all of Battlebots this year by far. You know, we knew Alkindle would be playing a patient in this fight, and that was displayed during the opening seconds, with Blacksmith immediately tanking 3 Bloodsport shots, the last of which being a significant strike which caught the side of Blacksmith, rocking it and flipping it over, but also ripping a wedgelet off of Bloodsport, as both robots would ultimately be fined and reset. Bloodsport though would keep grinding away post major impact, and Blacksmith would be right there to shove their face right into that Ferris wheel, doing its job despite a couple of minor errors which left Bloodsport the chances for 4 more significant strikes, leaving multiple major gashes on Blacksmith in the process. But when we approached the halfway point of the matchup, we would really see some of those opportunities for Blacksmith start to shine, as just after that 5th significant strike from Bloodsport, the Ferris wheel would find itself lodged into the driver's side spike strips, giving Alkindle its first offensive push of the night with 3 significant strikes before the pair would reset yet again, as things were business as usual once again for a moment. But Blacksmith would turn up the aggression from this point forward, eating more damaging strikes but showing even more control, with things really firing up during that last 56 seconds, as Blacksmith would pin Bloodsport once again, this time driving it right up onto the red square screws, where the power hammer would deliver 6 more significant strikes to the top of Bloodsport. But the Ferris wheel would do its job and leave Bloodsport unharmed, as the big heavy blade would take most of the impact here. As with 15 seconds left on the clock, the pair would break away one last time, and we would have Blacksmith's last charge, which may end up being the one which costed it the fight, running Bloodsport directly into the driver's side spike strips one more time and throwing all caution to the wind, as Alkindle would swing that power hammer right into the full speed Ferris wheel, obliterating the weapon on Blacksmith and Bloodsport's last wedgelet in the process, as time on the matchup would expire just 7 seconds later. And overall, I mean seriously, like I said, one of the best fights all year, and a fight where both robots 100% deserved a W. Legendary driving for the most part by Alkindle, and incredible signature power from Bloodsport, leaving massive gashes in Blacksmith and obliterating the power hammer, which in my opinion may have been the thing to decide this fight. Both robots pretty much owned exactly half of that fight, with Bloodsport dominating the opening minute, Blacksmith dominating the closing minute, and a pretty solid 50-50 split during that middle 60. Battlebots though, we say it again and again, wants that damage more than anything in the world, and with that beautiful de-weaponing at the 7-second mark, that was likely the play that I think cost Alkindle the match, and I think he knew it too. If Blacksmith had just waited half a second sooner to swing that power hammer down once the Ferris wheel had hit the driver's side spike strips, we may have been looking at a completely different decision, as we have a big time split decision here that ends up going to the horizontal spinner Bloodsport, the winner of this bracket after coming so close in 2020, now getting a chance to fight a robot it has beaten in the past, only 1 year ago in fact, a robot we call the bounty boss Scorpius. Now, before we jump into our main event here, our Grand Golden Bolt Bracket Qualifier, Bloodsport versus Scorpius. I must confess, I only realized after I posted the video last week, but I completely forgot to bring up the Scorpius versus Bloodsport meeting during the 2020 Battlebots opening week during that episode 4 preview video. An oversight by myself. I was too busy predicting a robot that went out in round 1 to win this whole thing, but I digress. Perhaps no robot in this Scorpius bracket could have been more scary for Team Bot Bash than Bloodsport itself here. Like I just mentioned, Bloodsport, who was having an insane year in 2020, would knock out the known to be unkillable Scorpius during that season premiere episode, solidifying itself as not a 2019 fluke, while Scorpius had to work uphill from that point forward in the season. But only one of these robots would end up winning their bounty episode, setting us up for this exciting rematch here as Zach and Diana want nothing more than to be in that Golden Bolt bracket against legends of Battlebots, but must get past the former challenge here first in a robot that has knocked it out before. The one big thing though that Scorpius does have going for it, which it did not have during the last time these two met, was the fact it's a bounty boss here. Bloodsport had to fight 3 battles already today, the last of which being very hard fought with weapon motors needing to be replaced. Scorpius meanwhile was fresh, pristine, and ready to go with likely a couple days to repair since that endgame loss. And entering pre-fight here, being that it's another hammer assault for Bloodsport, BNS Robotics would keep the Ferris wheel for this fight, but fall to only 1 wedgelet for this match. Scorpius, meanwhile, with over a year since their last fight and 3 recent fights to study, would bring out yet another new plow setup for their robots, named the Shield, which is your classic Scorpius plow with an extended cat ear similar to what we've seen on Lucky and Blacksmith during various fights in this episode. Pretty much just designed to keep that blade of Bloodsport from striking anything important up top, like that overhead spinning arm, of course, the hammer saw on Scorpius. Pre-fight strategies would see Justin Marple using a similar focus to what he did with Big Dill and Blacksmith, focusing on the sides, the wheels, and trying to strike the edge of that big front plow. Meanwhile, Team Bot Bash Robotics and Scorpius in their pre-fight would bring up another factor that was not present during their last matchup in 2020, the upper deck. This, of course, has been a bit of a kryptonite to a lot of horizontal spinning robots this year, so Zach Lytle wants to take advantage of the newfound weapon power they have and the arena dimensions now present to control Bloodsport for this matchup. And that pretty much would be exactly what Zach Lytle would do here. With all these factors and the new shield weapon, this fight would play out essentially like Blacksmith versus Bloodsport, but with much more finesse from the hammer saw driver, which does make sense given that this has pretty much been Zach's reign robot for a little over half a decade now. Now, Bloodsport would get his weapon into play, but Scorpius would start the fight by dominating Bloodsport with a handful of pins and 4 significant strikes. But not many major strikes from Scorpius after the surge of control, as something certainly happened to the weapon following that rush of attacks, as the weapon was just not working at all from that point forward, leaving Team Bot Bash to play quite a bold move, lowering the entire weapon downwards and using it as a battering ram essentially. And of course, this would be quite a gamble, but would ultimately work well as both robots managed a significant strike with the following impact, one that would nearly flip Bloodsport over while also bending the entire weapon module of Scorpius horribly. Scorpius though just kept fitting the entire weapon and weapon module into Bloodsport, taking the punishment and continuing to dominate control and aggression during this fight, even taking Bloodsport up onto the upper deck near the final buzzer. The fight would end up going to a split judge's decision, and finally, after 4 episodes, we would long last see one of the bounty bosses in Scorpius advance to the Golden Bolt tournament. While Blacksmith certainly controlled Bloodsport for half of their fight, Scorpius would dictate the pace and bully Bloodsport for essentially the whole 3 minutes, with the major damage that was delivered by Bloodsport being something Scorpius and Zach Lytle were seemingly counting on, feeding the weapon into the big spinner of Bloodsport after it already broke. So, I mean, honestly, I'm shocked the match even went to a split decision, but it is fair that Bloodsport did collect a ton of damage points in that matchup, 4 damage points, maybe even the full 5. And talking about Bloodsport, I would say it did save itself from a lackluster mid-season campaign overall with yet another impressive run here at Bounty Hunters / Champions. But once again, it's so close but so far away for Team BNS Robotics, the team that got all the way to the bracket finale in the beta episode last year, ended up falling to Lockjaw, and here they passed Blacksmith at the finals phase, only to fall to the bounty boss this time in Scorpius during 2021's Battlebots Champions. if the Bounty Hunter / Champions format makes a return for 2022 / 2023, maybe Bloodsport can take that final step to getting one of those silver medals at long last, but only time will tell. But talking about Scorpius here, you know, we've seen the Scorpius blog. We've seen how excited Zach and Diana have been about the chances to compete in this bracket, act as a bounty boss, defend that big medal that they care about so much, and get into this tournament of all-stars where I think they share a fair chance of doing pretty good in. And here they go. They did it. They defeated their past demon in Bloodsport, exercised the past opponent. But I did predict a rematch in the finals, and I predicted the same robot winning it twice over, but it would be a little bit different, though the same result would be there. I did say that I thought Scorpius was going to be the winner and the robot advancing to the final bracket, given just how stacked and how hard-hitting this bracket was going to be, given how loaded it was with robots like Lucky, Blacksmith, Bloodsport, Orbee, you know, all the main people that we've talked about, of course. But it does raise the eyebrow. How is Scorpius going to compare against some of the big names in this bracket? I mean, given the reputation a lot of these robots have in this Golden Bolt bracket, you know, former champions, undefeated robots, all-star champions, high-ranked seeds, Scorpius has none of that. It's just a beloved all-star competitor, but it is a very solid robot. It doesn't die, doesn't really get too many KOs, but it certainly doesn't die. So, you know, versus a robot like Tombstone, versus a robot like Glitch, versus a robot maybe even like Ribot, you know, maybe I would have to go Scorpius here, but there are a lot of demons I don't think Scorpius wants to have to face in this bracket. You know, I'm pretty sure I don't want to get shut down my endgame again, and who knows what lies in that other end, you know, this final position, the 8th and final spot in this Golden Bolt bracket, which will be decided next week. That bracket may even be more stacked than the one we've seen this time. You know, we have Black Dragon, a former semi-finalist, Whiplash, a former finalist, Witch Doctor, the Bounty Boss, a former finalist, and more importantly of all of them, we have Sub-Zero, who of course we know is going to win that bracket, but I digress. That's all we have to talk about here for episode 4 of Battlebots Champions, the 4th bounty bracket, the 4th Golden Bolt qualifier. Scorpius would come out on top, but we would see SwitchBack kind of shock everybody and become maybe the best Texan robot of the entire event. Lucky, meanwhile, would get seriously upset in round 1. We would also see Kraken have its final farewell matchup, ORBY Blade having a little bit of time to shine, Blacksmith and Bloodsport both redeeming their seasons, but of course, there can only be one Golden Bolt qualifier, and this time it is Scorpius. As that's going to wrap it up here at the Combot Collective, I am your host, as always, Sterling Brown. And for the Combot Collective, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can find those links in the description below. You can find our Discord in the description below. Please join that. That is where all of our video news drops first. Sometimes Robot Combat news will also drop there. And of course, for our YouTube page, please give us a comment, a like, and a subscription. Ring that bell icon. Give us all your constructive criticism. Of course, like I always say here at the Combot Collective, we want to get better every day. In fact, as you can kind of see around me, I have upgraded the stage to set up a little bit here, the studio apartment. It's probably not too noticeable. I cleaned up the table, obviously. It's not as messy. I moved everything around a little bit. Moved everything on the back shelf behind me a little bit. We got the Tombstone Vex kit now visible. I put the McDonald's toys up top. It looks like I have more stuff actually, which is actually pretty cool. So I'm not complaining about that. A couple more stickers up here. We have the Sub-Zero logo. We got the Smash logo. And obviously, look at that. A second monitor. I had Battlebots playing on it for some of the episode, but I kind of gave up because I kept getting this damn error message. But I digress. We're getting a little bit better every day here at the Combot Collective. And this series, Battlebots Champions, is getting better every week. Amazing fights, amazing impacts, amazing robots. And it's only going to get better when Sub-Zero wins next week. We're going to be playing Chilla Right to start that episode. I guarantee it, because I just want to see Sub-Zero win one match. Dang it. I just want Sub-Zero to win one match. Dang it. Please, Sub-Zero, please. You see this? You see this? Where'd it go? Ah! There it is. I need you to win, Sub-Zero. Please. I'm sick of the subway. I literally found a little plastic toy subway and it's haunting me. I need help. I need fucking help.
This was the Combot Collective. Find us on Instagram and Discord.